Sarah is a professor at the CUNY School of Law, which is part of the City University of New York. While primarily researching and teaching information law and policy, she also holds a master's degree in library science and is a senior fellow at SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. Her research and publications cover information access, surveillance and privacy, and informational capitalism. In addition to her official roles, she works in data justice projects with environmental and immigrant groups. Most recently, she dived into the field of publishers, library vendors, and other information service providers. Before I hand over the word, you are encouraged to pose questions already during the talk. Please use the Town Square channel in MetaMost. We will collect them and I will read them aloud for the stream listeners. Now the stage is yours, Sarah.
Thank you. It's really, really great to be here, and it is so. I know that it's always nice to meet in person, but it's also pretty amazing that there's this opportunity for people from literally all over the world to meet in one place. So I'm really grateful to see everybody, even though we don't get to physically see each other this year. So I am going to. I think I can. I'm going to be using slides, so bear with me if there are any slide issues, but you should all see my first slide. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the issue that as Joachim stated, is really a hot topic right now of surveillance capitalism in our library. So I'm going to first introduce kind of the idea of surveillance and tracking products in our library products, and then dive into kind of what they're being used for, what the goal of the companies are that are using them, and then kind of leave us with an opening for some discussion that I hope we get to have after my brief presentation. So let's begin. So this probably, I mean, in a sense, this has always been true, right? There's always been some curiosity about what people are researching and interest in surveilling people as they research. That's not new, but it is new that we are using a lot of third-party platforms, right? We're using a lot of platforms and services that we buy from library vendors. And more those products are collecting our data and following us as we use their products. And they're doing it for different reasons, for a whole host of reasons that I'll explain in a few minutes. But the fact of the matter is we have surveillance companies and data analytics companies that collect our data, running a lot of our library databases and services. So let me see. The companies that own our library resources are no longer publishers. So we were always used to calling Elsevier a publisher and Springer a publisher. These companies less and less are considering themselves publishers. They're more considering themselves data analytics companies or providers of intelligence solutions, or companies that provide predictions and prognoses, not just the content from their journals and from whatever it is that they're selling us in their databases, right? They're selling that content plus more products and services, and a lot of those products and services happen to be data analytics products and services that kind of meld together their published content with personal data about users and about researchers. So the first question I always like to answer is, how did we get here, right? How did we get to this place where traditional publishers that publish, science journals and humanities journals and other scholarship are now data analytics companies? Because in some sense, it's the same thing. They're providing information, right? But in other senses, that's quite different, right? Publishing journals and also, transitioning to selling data about people and about what people are doing with research. So this transition from publishing to data analytics actually started when digitization started, right? The first database was made long before we decided to start digitizing, kind of en masse different things. But the first kind of the fruits of digitization as we know it today started in the 1990s when we figured out how to turn all sorts of different media into kind of a binary code that we could put on a single, USB drive or on a single hard drive. We found a way to take music, images, and writings and put them all in the same place, right? We no longer have to have a separate storage facility for film reels as we do for journals and other texts, right? We can put a set of encyclopedias in a file right next to Bach concerto right next to Monet, right? They can all be on the same little disk drive. And that was an innovation that gave a lot of opening to publishers to kind of collect and platform and publish more different types of content. And around the time that mass digitization happened, we also had this new ability to share materials more easily than ever. So we could share sounds and images and writings with each other digitally and electronically instead of having to go to a physical place or wait by the mail, right, for a physical copy of something. So those two things, those two events, digitization and the advent of the internet and then the advent of Wi-Fi, which allowed us to take internet everywhere with us, in our phones and on our watches, that all began in the 1990s. And if you'll notice, if anyone's familiar with the publishing industry, that's also when the publishing industry kind of started to undergo big changes, mass consolidation, and kind of in some places collapse, right? As these companies started merging with each other and kind of went into this like bonanza of acquisitions and mergers. And that was all kind of the effects of companies figuring out how to monetize and profit from digitization and the internet. So major content publishers like Elsevier and Springer and all of, kind of the oligopoly of publishers in academia were excited, right, that they had all these new opportunities to platform and purchase more and more content, right? They could get all sorts of different types of journals. They no longer had to focus on several journals. They could acquire thousands of journals, right? A whole portfolio of copyrights, right? That's what I call it. No longer was each journal kind of a unique thing that had to be taken care of separately. Now they could kind of get hundreds of them and platform all of them. It was just this endless ability to platform as much academic content as they could get. So at this point, library vendors stopped considering just publishing, right? They could have just said, we're going to keep just publishing journals and we're going to maintain our roles as traditional publishers. Instead, they said, I think there's more possibilities here. I think there's other things we can do with our content. There are more ways for us to make money with our platforms. So they kind of veered off course from publishing into data collection. And some of this is these big data projects that are useful for academics, right? They help us find each other and find new research products, find grant opportunities. But some of it is a little opportunistic and exploitive, right? Some of it's not as good for researchers. But all of it is good for Elsevier's profits and ProQuest and Clarivate's profits, right? So when these companies kind of veered off the road from traditional publishing to data collection, they started buying up more and more types of content and also more and more types of data analytics products and services. So here's one example, Clarivate, right? You can see this is a kind of a timeline that Marshall Breeding made of Clarivate's kind of mergers and acquisitions to become a gigantic company that is now on the precipice of actually acquiring ProQuest, which is another huge company. But you can see all of these smaller companies kind of getting, spun up into Clarivate and becoming part of Clarivate. You can see a lot of Thomson and Reuters companies, and then Thomson Reuters merged and became Thomson Reuters. And you can see just a whole, kind of collection of different standalone companies that are now under Clarivate's corporate umbrella. Similarly, Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis acquired dozens of companies between, this is just reflects between 1993 and 2018, but there were acquisitions before, and there continue to be a lot more acquisitions. So dozens of companies, Reed Elsevier and LexisNexis acquired, and then, I mean, Reed Elsevier merged with LexisNexis in the 90s too. So just a lot of consolidation in both the library services platform like Clarivate, and then companies like Elsevier and other, you know, major library providers. So one thing to point out, this is kind of a close-up of part of that RELX list that you saw in the last slide. I put red stars by all of the data analytics products that the company bought versus all of the academic products. And you can see only one, the yellow circle, is the only data or academic focused product that is in this cluster, right? They got Mendeley, right, in 2013. But then most of Reed Elsevier LexisNexis's acquisitions have been in data analytics. So they're developing these robust data analytics products. And I'm going to explain briefly what data analytics means in this context, because data analytics is kind of a vague, broad term. So this is how Clarivate describes its data analytics products and programs. So Clarivate doesn't, they sell the access to Web of Science, which is an index, but really what that index is it's not a place where you can necessarily go and get the articles you need. You know, it's not an open access or even a closed access resource. It's really a tool to see how often people's research is looked at and who's looking at it. So it's collecting data about the way academics and grant funders and other people look at academic research. So the way Clarivate describes its data analytics is at the bottom of its pyramid of value, kind of the foundation, is all of its raw data assets. So that's all of the data it's collected under, you know, Web of Science, and all of the clicks it collects, everything it collects around just raw data about, I mean, both the content and then how people are using the content. Then it, you know, one kind of level up is smart data. So that's taking that data, categorizing it, creating links between it, just kind of organizing and sorting that data out. And then where the value is really added for companies like Clarivate and RELX is through running the data, the organized data, through data analytics products that make predictions and prescriptions. So they predict what might happen next in academic research, and they tell people what to do about those predictions. So they give suggestions to grant funders and to researchers and to institutions who are just trying to decide who to give tenure, you know, and who to hire, what labs to support, right? So they make those predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics with new data analytics products that they're developing or that they've acquired. So similarly, RELX describes its publishing platform as no longer being based in publishing, right? So here's just a little description from a Reed Elsevier LexisNexis article where one of the CEOs of RELX describes the company as having a heritage in publishing. So as being a former publisher that now has managed down its publication streams from 50% of what it does to 10%. It's print publishing sales. Sorry, my whole family was struck with an illness this weekend, so we are all going through this together, so apologize for the tissue. So they've reduced their print sales from 50% to just 10% of their business, and they're at the same time ramping up their data analytics products. And they are also redefining what they call themselves. So RELX no longer calls itself a publisher. It doesn't publish, you know, academic work or the law or news anymore. It now focuses its energy on being a business services company that provides insights and intelligence to businesses. And those businesses include grant funders and academia, if you want to look at academia as a business. But they don't consider themselves publishers. So when we call Elsevier a publisher, that's a misnomer, right? That's not what they call themselves anymore. They're a business services company. Clarivate has a similar description. Clarivate, this is from a description of some PR, some press about how they're acquiring ProQuest, which is a major library services platform company in the US. But it also collects a lot of data about users, right? ProQuest helps libraries organize their content and manage their subscriptions, but it also collects every click that a library user makes in ProQuest. So there's a huge amount of data that ProQuest collects. And Clarivate plans to use ProQuest library patron data to broaden their analytical offerings. So they also describe themselves as making predictive and prescriptive analytics, and talk about how ProQuest will broaden those analytical opportunities. They are working on building their Clarivate Research Intelligence Cloud, which is just a massive data collection and data analytics business service. So these companies are doing they're providing both the traditional library services that we need, right? Search functions and organizing, indexing functions and content, but they're also providing a whole different range of services to non-library provider or non-library businesses, and I'll get to that in a moment. So here is just one more image I like to share about. This is the visualization of what RELX describes its current business model as, and I like it because it looks like an extruder, like a clay extruder that you would put a bunch of different pieces of clay through, and then they come through as like a tube or a spaghetti hair or something. So they basically extrude all sorts of data, and that includes primary research. So that includes like Elsevier journals and publications. It also includes public records. So those are public records about people and events, people's personal data and proprietary data that they have, news articles, contributory databases, then unstructured records, which is just like data dossiers, personal data dossiers, etc., and then structured records. And they run that all through. You see that magic like circle image in the middle. And they come out with predictions and prescriptions that they sell to pharmaceutical companies, academic institutions, even like law enforcement and places like that, as I'll get to in a bit. So you can see that they make entity resolutions, link analysis, clustering analysis, which is grouping things together, and then complex analysis, which is like heat lists of people who may according to their predictive analytics, may commit a crime or may not be able to pay rent, may have an opiate addiction, all sorts of different things that they do not sell to libraries. They sell to other entities like policing, financial data, and legal analytics purchasers. So this slide kind of lays out, the academic metrics that they sell, the ones that we use, like SciVal, Pure, Plum Analytics, things that we use to maybe judge the value of our collections or rank researchers, pull out what articles might be the most popular. But they also, at the same time, RELX is creating products for law enforcement and government data brokering. So local, state, federal law enforcement, including in the United States, immigration and customs enforcement, intelligence agencies, and then the Department of Defense, and also agencies that kind of divvy out social services like Social Security Administration and other agencies that, decide if somebody should get welfare benefits, unemployment benefits, just social support that the government gives out. They also sell financial data products to landlords, benefits programs. Insurance providers, RELX has a booming insurance data business where it sells data to insurance companies about whether people are, a good or a bad bet to insure, how to insure people. Healthcare systems, so doctors, hospitals. and also employers, the people who hire and fire you, including obviously academic institutions. They also sell legal analytics products to lawyers, judges, what have you, to help law enforcement and government agencies decide how their case will fare in court, what are the likelihoods of victory, you know, how much money might you get out of a legal case. So they kind of game the legal system with those data analytics products. So they sell a lot of data analytics products across a lot of sectors, not just the academic sector. And here are some examples of things that these non-library analytics products do. They do public records data, so that's like data dossiers about all of us. They have millions of files of data about people all over the world. They link people and locations together, so they identify where people connect with places, where people connect with each other. They can notify people and entities of when somebody's status changes, so kind of give a progressive look at what somebody's doing, where they're going, whether they got hired or fired, whether they got arrested, you know, whether their name changed or what have you. They can ID people. They can ID people on a map, so put people in geospatially where they're located. They can make things like hot lists for police and for landlords. They can make lists of people who shouldn't be insured, who shouldn't be given certain types of medication in healthcare process. And they help law enforcement agencies share information with each other. So like RELX has a pool of over 1,000 law enforcement agencies where the law enforcement agencies can just see each other's data through Lexis. So they kind of create a fusion center, but they're like a private vendor instead of a government entity providing that service. So not only can their data analytics products do a lot of different things, they're also very robust. So they have very deep wells of information about us. They have over 283 million active Lex IDs. Lex ID is a data dossier, which has like thousands of data points updated in real time about a single person. They have over 1.5 billion bankruptcy records, 77 million business contact records, 330 million unique cell phone numbers, 11.3 billion unique name and address combinations. And so they have they have a huge wealth and depth of data, personal data about people all over the world. And that includes researchers through their research products. So in the United States, a librarian named Shay Swager actually managed to get a copy of his Thomson Reuters data dossier, which is similar to RELX data dossier. And it was, I think, 41 pages long. And one thing he noticed about it was that it contained inaccuracies and errors. And he saw that on the front page, the cover sheet that he got, like the letter he got with the dossier, the companies don't vouch for their own data quality. And this is actually one of the biggest problems with these companies' data analytics products and projects. The data inside of the products, they don't vet it. They depend on the downstream data brokers, so people who they buy the data from, to vet it for them. And that's usually not something that happens. So one of the worst things about these data collections is that they're inaccurate, and they're used to make very official big decisions about our lives, but they're not always right. So people get hurt because they can no longer get insurance, or they're not able to buy a car or get the healthcare they need because their RELX or Thomson Reuters data is incorrect, and there's no way to correct it because the companies get data from over 10,000 sources. So it's really, really hard to figure out what downstream data, where the data went wrong downstream, and to then go and try to correct it. So if a RELX data dossier is bad, if it has bad data and that data hurts you, there's oftentimes very little recourse that you have, which is really frustrating for consumers, for people, for all of us. So that's one thing to note about the data collections. And so I guess this is just kind of another indication about how data analytics is taking up more and more of these businesses. So this is from 2020. This is from RELX's annual report. You can see that science, technical, and medical materials, which is, in large part journals, still makes up the biggest chunk of the pie, but their risk services, which are their data analytics products, are starting to take over more and more of what they do. And that pie piece, I ostensibly likely will consider to grow. So a lot of the business Clarivate's whole business is basically data analytics, but companies like RELX, who are publishers, more and more they are also doing data analytics, and that will continue to increase as their data analytics capabilities increase, as the world's data analytics capabilities increase and the more data collect. So Alejandro Posada and George Chen had a report, I think it was, I want to say 2019, but you should, the citations on the next slide, it's an amazing, excellent report, and I advise you should all read it or write it down on your to-read list if you haven't read it yet. But what they did is they studied kind of not the growth of the risk products in RELX, but they really focused on Elsevier and found that Elsevier, as more things are becoming datafied and as we're kind of moving into this data analytics world, Elsevier's found a way to spread way beyond its traditional publishing role in library and academic services, right? And we all see this happening, right? We can see that not only do they publish journals, which used to be their only role, right? They published and sold journals. Now they also collect data from preprints and collect preprints and platform preprints before publication. And then they also sell data analytics after the research is published about who's clicking on research, how popular it is. And they're using that to create services to network grant funders, academics, institutions, and to evaluate research based on impact metrics, right? We're all familiar with that. So the data analytics service, just in the academic realm alone, has really created more financial and profit possibilities for the company, right? They can now monetize every part of the research process instead of just publication, right? And in that sense, that means that the preprints and what happens afterwards, we never really own that anymore, right? It belongs to Elsevier and Clarivate and these other companies who are buying it and making money off of it and making it their proprietary content, right? It takes kind of the ownership and ability to handle things away from us and gives it to them. And so this is the same image as the last slide, but with the actual products kind of overlaid onto it. So you can see what that looks like with all the products. You probably recognize some of these products. So yeah, I really advise you to go read that report. It's been very formative for me, and I think it's kind of eye-opening for all of us. So I made a similar, it's not nearly as lovely or well-researched, but this is kind of how I visualize the way that data analytics are being monetized beyond Elsevier, right? So generally, I start at the top circle. We give our personal data and our subscription money, right, to get past their paywalls and to get subscriptions to all the journals we need. We give both of those things, money and data, to Thomson Reuters, RELX, other data companies, right? Sorry, it should say Clarivate. I often talk about Thomson Reuters and RELX because they also happen to be a duopoly in the U.S. legal information sector, which is a whole different problem, but it's the same companies. So then the R&D, all that research and development that they do to develop more and more data analytics products, they all have big multi-million-dollar technology labs that are staffed with thousands of technologists that are building machine learning, AI, algorithmic products for them and ideas. So they sell those to landlords, creditors, insurers, employers, law enforcement, right? They sell those to all of their users. And that ends up putting more people either in, the way I usually describe it is, in the justice system, right? In the criminal or civil justice system, getting them kind of entangled with government or, in the case of academia, your grant funding, your preprints, your hiring, all of that becomes part of the system that then goes back to us continuing to need to fund these companies, right? We have to continue funding them, and we fund them even more because with more with more grant funders using these companies, with more law enforcement using these companies, we create more people who depend on these systems. So it's this kind of cycle where they manage to profit by selling content that we all buy, and then by developing data analytics to make more money off of that content, and then by selling us those data analytics, which leads to us buying more content or having to do more research, right? So they really have found a lot of ways to monetize all of this. So one question that people often ask, especially library workers and information science people, where does library data go? So very practically, what does it mean when your library patrons come and use ProQuest or Elsevier or Clarivate or what have you in your library? What happens to their data? So the short answer is we aren't sure, right? But we do have some indications that surveillance products are ending up in our research platforms. So Wolfie Crystal, who's a researcher that has done a really great job of seeing where these products get used, how these data analytics products get used, kind of how data brokering is working. He found at least one instance where RELX, Read Elsevier LexisNexis, is putting ThreatMetrix, which is actually a policing surveillance product, in their Science Direct research platform. And we can't be 100% sure why the company is doing this. I mean, likely they would say it's for data security, to make sure that nobody's, illegally downloading their copyright assets, right? Their journals without permission. So that could be one reason, but the fact is that ThreatMetrix, no matter what the rationale for collecting the data is, ThreatMetrix is collecting users' data when they use Science Direct. And that should be a little concerning to all of us without more transparency, more explanation of why a company like RELX would be surveilling researchers with ThreatMetrix. Little bit of a concern, right? So that's something to ask for more transparency on, or wonder about at the very least. And it's also a good kind of example of how these days, because we depend on platforms to get our research and to get our library services, we haven't just handed over the keys to our collections to RELX and to these other companies. We're also handing over our data, right? Because we have to use the company's platforms in order to get the research. We can't just go, online and get a copy of a journal article and read it most of the time. So usually we have to go through our institution, which puts us on one of these vendors' platforms, right? And the second we're on there, they will begin collecting our data, right? So that's kind of one of the problems of the kind of walled garden ecosystem of academic publishing online, with the paywalls and with the barriers to access, is that in order to get access, we kind of have to cede our control of our data, right? We have to say, oh, okay, I really need to look at this journal article. You can look at everywhere I click. When I'm, you can look, if I click on the author's name, you can look at that. If I click at related articles, you can look at that. We just kind of accept that as part of the deal. So we're not just paying a paywall, we're giving our data, right? And even if the companies claim they don't use our data now, so when we had this problem with legal research platforms in the US, at one point RELX sent an email to every law faculty in the country saying, we promise we're not working with ICE, we're not working with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Thomson Reuters is doing that, but we're not doing that, right? And they never publicly promised that they would never sell our data or use library research data, patron data. They never promised. There's no pronouncement ensuring that they're never going to use our data in ways that violate our privacy. And that's because depending on where the profits go, the companies will change their mind, right? So here's the letter that we got from RELX back in 2019. They said, we are not providing jail booking data to ICE. We're not working with them to build data infrastructure. That's in bold, right? They said another company is doing that, by which they meant Thomson Reuters. But then in 2021, when they finally got the offer, they signed a $16.8 million contract with ICE to provide data infrastructure, right? Because they got offered that money. So without more transparency and more assurance from these companies that they're going to handle our data responsibly, it's really, I think, important to recognize what our relationship with them is, right? They're no longer publishers. They're definitely collecting data. They're definitely selling data to a lot of people who we'd be uncomfortable likely with having our library data go to. And we have no insurance that they're going to keep our data private in the ways that we would want them to. So I think this is a good point to open it up to discussion. I'm happy to take questions, and I'm really grateful that you are considering this topic because I think it's a timely and important one.